Hey, welcome to another episode of the Coffee Break Podcast, where our mission is to share business ideas, practices, and strategies while we enjoy our cup of coffee. Today, we're going to be talking with Marvin King. He has recently put on a virtual event for their organization, a virtual conference. They had to switch gears from a live in-person event that they normally do all the way over to a virtual event. We're going to be talking a little bit about that, some of the elements that make it successful, some of the things that he's learned, the lessons that he's learned through the process, and going to communicate that with you. And if you're a small business and you say, I have no reason to do a virtual conference, well, there's ways that you can use technology to connect with your customers on a different level than you have before. So we're going to chat about all that right after this.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
Marvin, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
This is a pleasure. I'm excited to enjoy some coffee with you in a less stressful situation than the last time we enjoyed coffee.
Agreed.
We're going to talk a little bit today about virtual events because that is kind of a thing right now that everybody's dealing with. And so you've recently had to deal with that and putting one on and talking about more in the future. So we want to get into that. But before we do, we have a little thing here that's called Rapid Fire. It's 5 randomly selected questions with unknown point values just to get under your skin.
Oh,
you ready?
Okay. I
Okay.
am.
It's a fun game. You just don't know the rules.
All right, deal.
That's part. All right. Number 1, what part of elementary school do you wish you could incorporate into your adult life?
Recess.
Recess.
Yes. You got to have that part of the day that you look forward to just go out and get all the energy out to break the monotony of the workday sometimes, you know.
Do you have a playground at the office?
I don't. I wish we did. Our office is a playground, but I digress.
There you go. All right. Number 2, if you could pick your nickname, what would people call you?
Ooh. I have no idea. Oh, wow. That's a tough one. Could pick my nickname. I don't know. I'm just gonna say the man.
The man.
Yeah.
Very
It
original.
hits all areas there.
So you would prefer us to refer to you as the man?
Yes, I
Okay.
would.
All right.
It would make me feel good. It would make me feel good about myself.
We can change that on all of the documentation.
You're welcome.
We just interviewed the man. Number 3, what gets you excited about life?
Doing stuff that matters. Getting up and feeling like what I'm putting my effort into means something, not just monetary, but for actual affecting change, dialogue, creating those types of things.
Yeah, it's really important right now. I think that's a kind of a common conversation with a lot of people. It's what drives you outside of monetary. It's actually just impacting people in whatever that kind of looks like for you, but just actually seeing people change
Absolutely.
their mindset, their life, whatever. Very cool. Number 4, what's something that you do differently than most people?
Ooh. I honestly think I look at problems differently than other people just because, one, I always look at it as a way, how do I get better? How do I not have this issue again? And then I don't typically look at things as seriously as some other people. And I think that creates an environment of being able to get past it as opposed to being stuck in it in the moment or wallowing in, a defeat or a challenge.
Yeah, that's good because you have to look. Situations are going to happen, right? And then you look at it and go, okay, how can I solve this problem for the future? Don't worry about what has happened now because it's happened. So now we can just prepare for better next time. All right, number 5, last one. What is the difference between innocence and ignorance?
Ooh, man. I think innocence, maybe you don't understand something completely or you've never been taught or experienced something versus ignorance. I think ignorance has a lot to do with not being able to listen to people or their experience. Ignorance would say, that doesn't apply, or that's not a real thing, and you negate someone's experience.
Yeah.
So I think ignorance is really maybe an arrogant viewpoint versus listening and hearing someone. Innocence is just not knowing about it, but being willing to have a discussion or a conversation.
Innocence is kind of like not knowing, and ignorance is not being willing to learn.
Yes,
That's
100%.
interesting. Huh. It was a very random question. I thought it would be a fun one to ask. So congratulations. You made it through rapid fire. Score of 816.
Perfect.
So awesome work there.
It's not perfect. It's not even an even number. Stressing me out a little bit.
it's completely random, and there's no rhyme or reason to the scoring. It's just whatever number pops in my head. So
Gotcha.
I don't think there's ever been the same score, actually. I've just
nice.
made it up.
So I got the highest score, though.
Yes, exactly. For
That's
today.
all I needed to know.
So we're going to talk about virtual conferences. We're going to talk about what. So I guess as definition, and maybe this should be an easy out of the park question, but what is a virtual conference?
Well, for us, in my experience, our experience with a virtual conference was taking what we normally do in person at a different event or hotel, and then putting it virtually through a computer where people can log in and experience it. And it was quite challenging in some aspects, but we basically brought what we do in person to a computer into their homes.
So one of the things that I want to come back to, and I should probably grab my notepad here so I can keep notes, but one of the things I want to come back to on that question is maybe looking at it, and so we'll kind of look at this in reverse, but looking at it after the fact, I'm wondering how many people that would typically not have a conference. So for instance, our company, we attend other conferences, but we don't put on our own conference. Right. It's just not part of what we do. But it is intriguing because it can be done for somebody that's never done it before. So it's almost like a new avenue. Yeah. There are a lot of companies that had to transition from in-person to virtual events, but I think it also is opening up the door for people that have never had an in-person event that could say, hey, well, hold on a second, how can we leverage this? All right, so the question then is, who needs to create a virtual conference? So you said, hey, we had an in-person event before, and you have multiples of these annually. And that is part of kind of the dynamic of the organization and which I don't think that's abnormal for a lot of people that put on in-person events, that in-person, that networking, that shaking hands, which is a no-no now, but that type of thing is now something that you have to adapt. So outside of that, who really needs to look at virtual events to help engage with their customers?
Honestly, I would say anyone. I think it's for us, obviously, we had the in-person type event, and we had to change because of COVID and the things that we're dealing with right now. But it's a very efficient way to get in front of your clients and to get your message out. I think it's very cost effective as well. People kind of think it wouldn't be, but you have to team up with the right people to get it done. But I think everyone and anyone needs to use what we have instead of it stifling you and allowing or causing you not to get out and get your message out.
Because it's your option is do nothing or transition, right? Those are kind of the two options, because the in-person thing, even if you wanted to do it, there's so many regulations now, and even the venues that typically you would use aren't allowing it to happen.
Some of our venues and things that we've been experiencing is half capacity or even 25% capacity, and they're wanting to recoup their money, obviously, and they're wanting to get their people back to work. But the efficiency for us in limiting that number is just not good. Yeah. So you have to weigh, the pros and cons of that as well. So
is a virtual event a waste of energy, a waste of time?
Absolutely not. I think from my personal perspective, I feel like I worked more on this virtual event than I worked in our events in person. If anybody that works with me is listening or watching this, I'm sorry. But there was just so many more elements to direct and to figure out. And we were limited on the amount of people that could be in the room, that could be at the office. So there was a lot more work placed on my shoulders personally. But I also, the experience from all of our clients was, I didn't expect it to bring as much value as it did. I wasn't really, I hopped on because I thought it would be cool to see what you guys were doing, and didn't realize I would leave with so much value. So, and our events are training. So we train people on how to, set up their businesses, how to run their businesses effectively.
Yeah.
So we brought more value, I think, because our team was amped up and ready to go. Our coaches were ready to go. It was like the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like everybody wanted it to be successful. And so it brought this energy and this camaraderie that we hadn't really experienced in.
So just for context, for anybody that's kind of listening or watching, you work with a coaching organization that coaches other essentially small businesses, right? And so it is, when you say training, you're training on business operations, and these people actually are taking time away from their business for extended period of time. And typically at an in-person event where you get all that value, but you have an in-person event, you have a travel day, you have the event days, and then you have your travel day back.
Right.
So you always have 2 extra days on that versus the virtual event. Always. It was just the kind of time for the live event. So with that, I guess my question is, because this is, I think, what a lot of people ask. All right, so we've been on 1,000 Zoom meetings. Everybody's been doing them. How in the world do I keep this engaging? How do I make this valuable so that I'm asking people? Because your particular event, which we can kind of get into some of the specifics of it, but it was not like an hour and a half event. This was a full day, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. at night.
2 days.
For 2 days.
Oh, 2.5 technically.
Yeah, event. So how do you keep it engaging for that entire time where people are actually still there, they're still focused, and they're still going to get value out of it?
Well, one of the biggest things that I fought myself, and I'm not a presenter, and so sometimes these speakers and presenters are like, wait, you want to cut my time frame? Yes, I want to cut your time frame, because an hour and a half of you talking in person is much different than an hour and a half of you talking on screen.
Yeah.
Typically, in those rooms, we would have table talk where you'd get together with your table and discuss what was talked about, and you had the Q&A back and forth. We don't have that. We did have Q&A, which was really cool, but we don't have the talking to each other back and forth at the table and discussing things. So we cut down the time frame to 45 minutes, maybe an hour on some that were typically an hour and a half. So we were, people's their
attention span,
that word, yes. Their attention spans are very short, and so we wanted to make sure that we were good with that, but also using lots of PowerPoint, using lots of visual aids that broke the monotony of just someone speaking and just keeping that that contact and that engagement.
So, and this is kind of my personal preference. So I'm interested to hear kind of your perspective on it. What is the difference between a webinar and a virtual conference or a virtual event?
Honestly, that's something that we're dealing with right now, is because we're doing another event in August that we may have to go to the webinar aspect because it'll be over 1,000 people. But with this, with the summit that we just did, there was about 650 people. And so with webinars, you don't get the interaction that you do with a live event. We had a chat. There was so much going on. We were videoing people in from other cities and to speak and everything. So it was more a live event creates more engagement than just a webinar would, in my opinion and my experience.
Well, because I guess when somebody uses the term webinar, the first thing that comes to my mind is a PowerPoint presentation with no video. It's just PowerPoint and somebody sitting there talking, very monotonous, like while everybody's just... Hey, thanks for listening to the Coffee Break Podcast. If this information has been helpful to you, or you just really kind of like our theme song, can you help us out by rating us on whatever app you're using? And if you get really fancy, how about sharing a screenshot on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn? Okay, enough of all this. Let's get back to the conversation. That is, I guess that's kind of a live event can essentially, you can replicate some of the live.
You can,
like elements.
Exactly, like what we did. We start off our event with an intro video, and so we had the intro video. We have an introduction of speakers. We did the music cues and the slides and bringing people up on stage. Like we did all of the things that we would typically do at a live event to keep it feeling like they were there.
So it was. I would use the term that you turned it into a live broadcast,
Absolutely.
versus a webinar, and that's, I think that is part of the engagement level. Is, oh wow, okay, this is like like you're watching a television show or a reality TV show or whatever. Like, what's going to happen versus just the screen is covered by a PowerPoint, and at some point in time, my eyes are gonna glaze over and I'm gonna take a nap. So having the elements that are kind of changing and not just watching a PowerPoint is, I think, an interesting element.
And also for our speakers, they were able to see people engaging and nodding their head or writing notes when they said something good. So it caused them to have that engagement as well. They weren't just looking at their PowerPoint or their notes. They were actually seeing, hey, what I'm saying is affecting people. So it brought as much of the live event as possible without being together.
It's interesting, when you're presenting from a live stage and you get up there and you start talking and you see heads nodding, you people in agreement, or you get hand claps, or whatever it is, that interaction. And when you go, I've seen it happen so many times. When you sit in this room and it's quiet and all you see is that camera with the red light on it, and you're like, the energy level goes like 40%. So it's something interesting. All right, so that's kind of the context of live event versus webinar. How do you promote something like that? And let me try to rephrase the question. Do you promote that differently than you do an in-person event?
I think we probably did them similar. I think with the event coming up in August, what we've done is, because we're not in person, the cost is a little bit less, which is good. So we're promoting in that aspect. And we're also promoting something fun, kind of what we're calling watch parties. So they can pay a certain price for 10 people or more. They can bring these people into their office and do a watch party. So this person that is a salesperson, the lender, or the realtor can say, hey, I'm going to bring in all of these people. You guys are my special guest to this event. And so it's creating a dynamic where they know what's going on, what I mean? And so they're able to bring that value to them.
So that's interesting. It's thinking outside of terms and trying to play to the advantages of it.
Yes.
Lower cost, no travel cost. So those are the advantages, instead of focusing on, and I think that's probably where a lot of us have faltered in dealing with this, is talking more about the disadvantages of, we can't be in person, but focusing more on, hey, we can have more people because our travel cost literally is zero. We can have everybody involved where we might have only selected one or two to be involved. That's very interesting. So what is the planning process like for this versus an in-person event, a live event where you have people coming and all of the kind of organization and people coming from every different where, and all the coordination and going in association with that versus the virtual? How do you plan differently for it?
Well, you've got to think about your event and the value that you're trying to bring to people, and you've got to be realistic in those expectations, and you've got to be able to train your team. I think with me, I had to look at the event that we normally do, and then I had to cut it down to what we would do virtually, and then I had to train my team to execute the event. So I couldn't be in all places at all times. That was impossible. So we did breakout meetings and things like that. So I had to train people on how to execute those breakouts, on how to be the person that guided those. And so I think you just have to know the value that you're trying to bring. You have to be realistic, and you kind of got to give yourself some grace in that aspect. Your expectation is here, but there's grace in the moment of it. We're not in control of technology. We don't, but making sure that there was communication between the teams, that there was open, we had a chat, a text thread where every question and answer, anything we needed was going on in that, and you knew not to put just a joke in there. This was for business purposes, So if there was an emergency, we could respond, and we could kind of we all carried it together.
Gotcha. Because you had some people in person helping on the live end, but then you also had people that were complete remote that were also supporting it as well, which was a very interesting dynamic. So from that point, what is something that you wish you would have known, like post the event, after the event was over? What is something that you wish you would have known before you got started in the planning process?
I wish I would have known I wish I would have known the importance of communicating to my team and those expectations.
Okay.
Meaning communicating to my boss, hey, listen, we're doing everything we can that's humanly possible for us to do, but there may be a technical error. In that moment, we will fix it. We will do whatever we can.
Yeah.
Just be prepared for that. Communicating to the team about how to put out little fires. Just more of that. I mean, obviously, you're going in and you're not. We did this very early on, so
Sure, yeah.
we didn't know some of these things. So I think hindsight's always 20/20. But I could look back and go, I should have been a lot more clear, a lot more concise on what to expect and how to respond to it.
Yep.
And like I said earlier, the grace that we're all giving each other, to make it happen.
Well, I think the big takeaway that I would see from it is just understanding that it is different. And
Absolutely.
So there's some timing things that you want to deal with that in a in-person event. You have the production element of it, but timing is everything because you have a mass amount of people that are moving from place to place, and where it may take a group 20 minutes to move from one room to another, now all they have to do is click a link. So it's a 2-minute transition instead of a 20-minute transition.
Right.
There's less of the lunch break is different now. The dinner break is different now. There's all of those different elements. But I think that one of the interesting components that I would say from this is looking at it holistically as a production broadcast, less of a webinar.
Absolutely.
I think that's really where somebody that's looking into doing this is going to win. If you just try to take and do a bunch of webinars, or even just a bunch of Zoom calls, there's still something that's going to be missing there, or something that doesn't make it special.
Yeah, you wanna try everything that you can to bring some life to what you're doing. A lot of webinars, just the term webinar kind of falls flat.
Yeah.
So what can I do to bring life to that? Like setting up your presenters and your speakers for success, by giving them outlines. And a lot of speakers don't like that, but hey, listen, you want to do a 5-minute introduction and 10 minutes of a lecture and then 10 minutes of Q&A. You don't want to lecture for 45 minutes and then 15 minutes at the end because you're going to lose people. A lot of what I did setting up for it was to log into random webinars and random virtual events that did not apply to me whatsoever, and just see what it was like to be a participant.
Yeah.
And some of them were very boring.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, how in the world are they going to do this for a whole day when we had to do 2 days? So just figuring out how to make that happen. And a lot of it, honestly, I know this sounds silly, but a lot of it was they go out of this room, they go into this room. A lot, like changing the atmosphere, changing what they saw on the video, changing it up really does create that as well.
So with that, I would say one of the interesting things that I saw with your event, the presenters in person and the remote presenters did something that was very unique. I think that was out of the box from what normal people would be doing in these types of events, and they were all standing up.
Yes.
So the in-person presenters stood up and presented just like they would be normally in front of a room, even though they had the ability to sit down and sit in front of a computer screen. But the remote presenters also did the same thing.
They did.
Why is that important? How does that make a big difference?
There's an energy about standing up. There's an energy about your posture, honestly.
Yeah.
If you and I were sitting here and we're, slumped down, it creates a different feel versus sitting up straight. But there's also an energy, and these are salespeople, let's be honest, so they're all hyperactive anyway.
Yeah.
My issue was honestly keeping them from pacing back. Like, okay, here's your 3-4 feet. Do not go outside of these lines because that creates a whole different aspect from the viewer. But there's just an energy that brings about when you're standing up, when you're you're hitting it head on, if that makes any sense.
No, I think it made a big difference in the way that the message is communicated, the way that people engage with it, is because the person that's presenting the information. And again, I guess I go back and I'm probably beating a dead horse when it comes back to this, but the webinar feel where it's that the person is sitting there behind the screen with their PowerPoint advancing to the next slide. Now somebody's standing up and they're actually doing. it's still a little bit awkward because they're looking at a camera versus people, but bringing some of that energy and some of that vibe. What was something from the live event or from the virtual event that you were surprised at how well it went versus what would normally happen at an in-person event?
So what we typically do at our in-person event is in the evening we have a fireside chat, and so that's Rick's. My boss is a cigar smoker. He wants to sit down and talk shop to people, and so that happens around a fire pit, and But typically that's maybe an area about as big as this room, and there's chairs around, so maybe 30, 40 people can actually be in the moment, and even fewer of those can actually get a question in, if that makes sense. And when you and I are in person, if I'm talking to you, I'm going to have a hard time breaking this off to go talk to another person. So I could probably pull people in, but I'm going to have difficulty going, all right, we're done, next person. With the virtual event, it was amazing. We had over 300 people for these fireside chats, and it was over a 2-hour period, and I would say we had at least 50, 60 questions. And it was just so much more beneficial. Like, we could answer the question, we could move on, we could talk. And typically you find that a lot of people have the same question anyway. So you're answering more questions from more people, but it's not that you and I are having the conversation and the person over there can't hear it. Suddenly this message is going out to all of these people. And so they're getting their question answered without even asking the question to begin with. So that really, really worked well for us.
So it was kind of like a casual roundtable.
Absolutely.
And with everybody that you, like you said, you normally would have 30 people that could actually engage in it. And now you've multiplied that times 10. That's like just a massive audience. And it was casual, but comfortable, right? And professional. So you had the ability to get the communication back and forth, and having that two-way conversation was it was incredible, the amount of conversation that happened.
And let's be honest, a lot of people, as we call them, keyboard warriors, like you'll have a conversation with someone behind a keyboard, but you're not going to have it maybe up front or in person. And so it also gave those people that probably wouldn't go up to this person running a conference and in front of 40 or 50 people and ask a question, it gave them the ability to ask that question because they maybe weren't as intimidated as they would have been in person.
That's a very valid point. And it also gives you access to somebody that you may not have had access to before. So it's a completely different element. Can you copy this key? That's a question we get asked about 3,422 times a year. And how can you actually be sure that the person who asked that question is supposed to get a copy of that key? Well, we think you should always know who can copy your keys to your business and your home, because it could be your neighbor, an old employee, a contractor, or even worse, your mother-in-law. At Loc-Doc Security, we believe in protected key systems, so you always know who has a copy of your key. To find out more, visit locdoc.net or stop by our Charlotte location. Loc-Doc Security, helping you protect your people and your property. So those components of it, the using it or treating it like a broadcast versus a webinar, trying to find things that you can be engaging, getting your presenters to actually stand up and do the presentation just like they would be if they were in person, rather than being more casual and comfortable sitting down at a desk. Those are a few elements that kind of keep it engaging. Looking forward, because you said you're looking at doing this again, what are some of the elements that you're trying to take from the previous example and apply things that you want to kind of cut out and say, we don't want to do that, or we need to tweak that and make it better and more engaging?
One would probably be the chat engagement. So what we found out the first time that we did an event was that the chat was awesome, where people were constantly in there, but it could possibly have been a distraction in some aspects. And you couldn't differentiate between someone that was an employee or our coaches versus someone that was just a client or even an attendee visitor type thing. And so, there was this interaction that someone maybe that didn't have the experience or the expertise was trying to answer the question. And, so we're trying to figure out how to designate our coaches as, maybe it's a different color that we can designate their names or whatever that makes people know this person works for us and has the answer.
Yeah.
And then maybe pinning those answers or questions to where, we don't have the same question again 5 or 10 minutes later because that person was disengaged and now is engaged. So the chat was awesome because it was constantly popping, for lack of a better term. But I think some just maybe a little bit of clarity in that and a little bit more direction in that would be good for us. So we're trying to figure that one out.
So a little more structure, like the chat, having the open chat, because typically at a live conference, you're not chatting with somebody across the room.
Exactly.
You might be chatting with the people at your table or directly next to you, but now you have the ability to chat with whoever, and then it can get a little chaotic at times, or maybe the right people aren't answering the question.
Right.
That's very interesting. And I guess really, I think that's a valid point. Same people ask the same question over and over again because it's scrolling so fast that you want to.
Or as a presenter, or I handled the Q&A, there would be questions asked, but I'm like, oh, that's a great question, but then 14 other questions came in, and then I'm like, oh, I got to get back to that question because I want to make sure that person gets the value, and it was a good question. So being able to moderate that a little bit better is something we're.
Yeah, I'm sure different platforms have the availability, but it would almost be like if somebody posed a question, people could like add a reaction, kind of like your Facebook, Instagram comments, where
Absolutely.
You could say, "Hey, oh yeah, that is a good question. Let's keep tagging that one." And so now that one's got 15 people that say, "Yes, I agree. Let's ask that question."
And that's on us to give more clarity in that aspect. Like obviously hindsight's 2020, but we could have explained it better and said, "Hey, listen, the chat is solely for Q&A, or because we had an awards portion. So that's when everybody's like, oh, you're awesome, things like that. So, during that, yes, please encourage and get engaged. But during an actual session, this is what we're using the chat for. So if we gave more clarity and direction in that aspect, then we would have gotten it back.
Applicable chat operation, essentially.
Yes.
If it's in a classroom setting and you have questions, this is how this works. If you're in just a general session and you want to give kudos, that's very interesting because it could get sideways either way. I want to kind of shift a little bit in kind of way of closing, but again, going back to our business, we've never had an in-person event. We don't have a real reason to put on a conference, an in-person conference. But the whole concept of a small business and looking at technology and looking at a way to connect with your customer because you're not able to connect with your customer in the same way that you have previously. Like, what are your thoughts on trying to leverage some technology in the similar mindset without maybe having to go through a big broadcasting type setup, but being able to set up some small little events, like micro events that would engage in customers? What are your thoughts on that, and how could somebody take something like that and make it applicable to their small business?
I think people honestly don't utilize social media for what it's there for. One of the things that I'm doing right now in our company is, so of course we do these events, and of course we have coaching and training throughout the week. But one of the things that I'm doing monthly is taking one of our coaches and one of their students and doing an interview with them. So this is a Facebook Live interview, and and we broadcast it. We promote it obviously each month, and people know the same date, same time. This is what we're going to do. But what it does for our business is it highlights the relationship between a coach and a student. And what they've experienced and the good, bad, and different. But it also gives business tactics as well. So it highlights our business, but then it gives tactical information for people that aren't in our coaching industry or are in the industry but aren't in our business. So it draws them to our company and to what we do as well by sharing some of the tactics that this student has learned with this coach. So I kind of interview them and things that they've done. And we do, it's 20 minutes because we know, again, people's attention spans are very short. 20 minutes, any Q&A, we answer those at the end. And then we kind of highlight our next event that we're doing, and then we're done. So, but it's a great way to get it out and do a little mini conference or whatever, or breakout session, if you will, without having to go into, a studio setup or something like that.
That's very interesting. So it's almost like dual purpose. It is promoting what your coaching business does.
Yes.
So it's an outward promotion, but it's also can be internally beneficial as well for people that are already in the program to get some additional tactical.
Right.
That's an interesting perspective. So I guess that is an interesting challenge because it's something that I know. For Loc-Doc security, it's something that we're trying to figure out. How do we create some of these micro opportunities that we can leverage technology and connect with more than the one-on-ones that you would normally have in person, and try to create that value and make the best of the situation that we can, but to continue to kind of spread the message. So I think other small businesses that are out there that may be watching or listening, like it's just something that you need to start thinking about and trying to think, okay, how could I take this? Maybe it's not a 2.5 day event. Maybe it's not even an 1.5 hour event. Maybe it is a 20-minute, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, something like that you can broadcast out and connect with people, but share relevant, valuable information that's going to get them excited. So with all of that, the results of the event that you had, the virtual event, did you have equal to, better than, worse than type results from the virtual event than you would do from an in-person? Like how did it play out? I know it's hard. And at the end of the day, I'll answer part of my own question. It's hard to compare those two because it's two different things. But like from an overall perspective for the organization, what was the general consensus?
The consensus was that it was better than expected, 100% better than expected. With our in-person events, and because our events are fairly expensive for the industry that we're in, typically that amount is great for an in-person event.
Sure,
but because we're so new to virtual events and the world is new to virtual events, honestly, it was, I'm not really sure about that. So we didn't have as many, but the ones that came stuck with us. We were able to typically, we lose some clients and we replace them with people that have come in. And so we were able to we were able to actually grow as opposed to going back like many companies and coaching programs in our industry have had to do. So I think for us, it was great.
So, and one last thing that I'll kind of tap into, and we'll kind of wrap this thing up, is just kind of full disclosure. We have a production, a digital content team as part of our organization, a kind of a separate team that helped to produce this event with you. And I think it's an interesting component because if you're going to do the micro event, I don't think it requires the assistance of a production team, but at the level that you guys put on a broadcast, it was real production equipment, broadcast equipment. Like, turned your entire conference room into essentially a live broadcast studio. And that's something I think it's important to note, that to bring it to life, to make it look like a broadcast, you want to bring in the components to make it an actual broadcast and to get those elements. So I guess my point of it is, if it's something that you're looking at doing as a real event, look at it as that. Because I think you mentioned earlier, fraction of the cost of a live in-person event for the cost to produce it, but it gave the elements and it got you a close to end result that you were looking for, that you would normally have for an in-person. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of toss that out there, that it wasn't that you guys just sat around and with your computers and did the event.
No, absolutely not. And we wouldn't have been able to do what we did without the help of you guys, in the sense of, I didn't have to man a camera. I didn't have to tighten a shot. I didn't have to do any of those things. All I did was work on making sure that our content was the best that it possibly could be. And so I guess I was the producer of this event. So as the producer, it took the weight off. A weight off of just knowing that this is handled. This is where I need to put my efforts. Yeah, it gives you the ability, I guess, as the business to get the correct information out there and partner with somebody to leverage the technology side. So I just think it was an interesting element to point out, and just from a disclosure standpoint, that's kind of how I'm familiar with the event. But I've seen and been involved with several different live events, or virtual events rather, that people are just trying to answer these questions. Okay,
nobody wants to just sit on another Zoom call. Nobody wants to just sit on another webinar. So how do we make it different? How do we create some engagement? I think there's platforms out there that help with that. I think the production side of it, and I think on top of all of it is if you get the platform that's solid and get that out of the way, and production that can be solid and reliable and get that out of the way, it opens you up to do as a business what you do best and present your business. And if you get distracted with the other elements, then it can be a cause for problems. But if you can get that out of the way and just focus on the message that you need to get across, then I think you're going to have a win.
Because that's what we did. I mean, once those things, the technical aspect was done and it was in capable hands, well, then all we do is focus on our value, focus on this is a live event. Like exactly like when you talk about the webinar or whatever, like this is not a webinar. This is not just something that we're going to click through some slides and say sign up at the end. Like we're treating this like a live event. Everything that we would do in person, the energy that we would bring in person, plus some, because we're in front of a camera, we just had to do it and show up.
And find ways to enhance what you would normally do in live with the technology side. I think that's big. And then the other thing that I did want to reiterate, I think you hit on it earlier, which was a very, very valid point, pointing out the positives. Because it's virtual, you can potentially reduce the cost for the event for the attendees, and that's a very. I've seen a lot of people do that. There's a marketing company that I follow, and they basically had to do the same thing. And they said, "Hey, because of this, you now have access to this event that's normally $5,000. It's only going to be $1,500." Right. It's like, oh, and I don't have to travel. Okay, maybe this is something that you need to look at. And so it is actually a positive, and you can make it a positive, and you can do more of those type of things where typically you'd have to spread it out just for travel and all that. So
just a reminder, you're listening to the Coffee Break Podcast. Also, we wanted to let you know that our team puts together a weekly blog post. You can find it at locdoc.net/blog. It's guaranteed to raise your IQ by 12 points or your money back. So it's pretty much a win-win. All right, back to the conversation.
Marvin, thank you again for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. For those of you who are watching or listening for the first time, we definitely encourage you to check out our podcast page on our website, locdoc.net/podcast. You can subscribe there to the audio version, and there's also a video version of this. If you're listening to this, you can check out the video version as well, and that is all at locdoc.net/podcast. You can find it on Facebook and YouTube as well. Just search for LOC-DOC. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and if this information was relevant to somebody else that you may know, we'll make sure you share it with them as well. And we appreciate you joining us each and every week for a new episode of the Coffee Break Podcast. We'll see you next Tuesday at 9 a.m.